everybody. It's time for another episode of the Silver Bullets Podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
Chip, there was supposed to be a very big rivalry game this past Saturday. Didn't happen. I don't know if you heard about that.
I may have heard something about it. I don't know, kind of whispers or something like that.
So you and I recorded last week, and the next day, I think it was, that the game was canceled. We had kind of warned people and hedged our messaging last week. You know, if the game goes forward, it turned out that it did not, and well, you know, we were deprived of one of the great traditions of every fall.
Tremendously disappointing, especially for the players who, I mean, the official trailer that Ohio State sent out kind of just goes to show how intense that rivalry is and how much the players, they put into it, that game all year long. So I as disappointed as I am as a fan, I can't even imagine what it must be like, especially for those seniors who were looking forward to playing against that team up north one final time in Ohio Stadium.
You look at a guy like Jonathan Cooper, who, you know, he could play one more game last year without burning a red shirt, and he chose that game and against Michigan, and you know, it says a lot about what this game and what this rivalry means to Ohio State, what it means to the players that come to Ohio State to play football and play in games like this. And it's a little unfortunate. I think Jonathan Cooper would have been in line for his 5th gold pants, and I don't know, Justin Hilliard might be going for 6.
That seems plausible. I would think definitely. I mean, based on both young men, they both have had their share of trials and tribulations, so that certainly seems plausible that they would be going for pairs 5 and 6.
Yeah. So you had predicted a 56-7 victory for Ohio State. I had predicted 42-20. I'm sure we were both exactly correct on what the score would have been somehow. And then our picks to click were Haskell Garrett and Garrett Wilson for me, and Tommy Togiai and Master Teague for you, and I'm sure they all would have clicked just wonderfully in that game. But alas, that did not happen on the field as it did in our minds. And now we move forward. And one of the things we talked about was whether or not, if that game took place, Ohio State could get another game and get the minimum required number of games in to reach the championship. The Big Ten championship, and you know, it turns out that they didn't, and they didn't need to, because I think cooler heads prevailed at the Big Ten office with, you know, you were running into a scenario there, Chip, where, you know, Indiana potentially couldn't play, you know, if they had some COVID problems that lingered, and you know, they had one loss, a loss to Ohio State head-to-head. And then once you get beyond Indiana, it was looking really scary for somebody to put in from the Eastern Division in that game. So I think in the end, you know, the Big Ten went with the only decision that the league could make, and that is to change its arbitrary rule of a minimum of 6 games and just cancel that rule out and say, you know, we have more information now. We know more than we did then. And by the way, this is the best team record-wise head-to-head in the East, and so they're going to get to go and represent the East in the Big Ten championship game against Northwestern.
I'm also glad that members of Buckeye Scoop have been doing their very best to combat against the forces of ignorance on Twitter and other social media platforms by pointing out that if the game had been played and Ohio State had lost, not that either of us or probably any of our fans anticipated that, but if the game had been played and Ohio State had lost, that in and of itself would have allowed Ohio State to qualify for the Big Ten championship game based on that minimum game requirement. So like you said, it certainly seems as though cooler heads prevailed, and they did the most logical thing to kind of make up for what has been a very difficult year for everybody, you know, players, coaches, and especially fans.
It's not like Ohio State was 3-0 and sitting there and hadn't really played anybody. It was pretty obvious that Ohio State was the best team in the Eastern Division. Ohio State typically doesn't slip up in games against Eastern Division teams. It's usually some trip to the West where maybe potentially some student is dying, and then the team is kind of rallied around them, or something. Strange things occur, and Ohio State has stubbed its toe a couple times that way, but it's always been on the road against a Western Division team. It's not typical of an Eastern Division head-to-head matchup, and this was, I think Ohio State was favored by 30 plus points in all of the games that were canceled, if I'm not mistaken.
That certainly seems right. Ohio State, like you said, I mean, they were supposed to be playing against Illinois, and we'll talk about Illinois later on. And it certainly seems as though when you think about all of the miscues, as you said, in previous seasons, they usually have come against Big Ten West Division opponents on the road. So in terms of like what the average point spread that where Ohio State was favored, that escapes me at the moment. But it's certainly, I think, Ohio State, the possibility of possibly tripping up. There weren't that many games on the schedule that you or I or anyone else really were concerned about for Ohio State. I'm just glad that they're going to be going for an unprecedented fourth straight Big Ten championship against Northwestern this coming weekend.
Yeah, a rematch of 2018, as it turns out, the Buckeyes and the Wildcats, and we will get into that matchup in a little bit. The fact that Ohio State was highly favored in those games doesn't necessarily prove anything. It doesn't mean Ohio State would have won. I mean, we saw what can happen this past weekend with a team favored by 20 plus points, losing to a team that had basically largely sucked all season, and had also a lot of guys out with COVID-19 issues, either contact tracing or with the a positive test. But I don't think there's a lot of shoe throwers on this Ohio State team.
No, that certainly would be a category I think that Ohio State is lacking in.
So yeah, the Big Ten championship is the proper two teams. I know I saw a lot of people on Twitter this weekend saying that Iowa might be the best team in the West, and maybe it is now, but they lost the head-to-head to Northwestern, also lost to Purdue, which is not a good look. And so Northwestern has done enough to clinch the West. Ohio State has done apparently enough to clinch the East. And it makes no sense for anybody to have a problem with this, because the main thing that you want is you want the two best teams to face each other. And I mean, if everybody's being honest, the people that have griped about this online, it's not like they think the Big Ten is not adhering to some high moral standard. By if the league would have kept its rule about 6 games, because no one cares about that rule. That rule was arbitrary. Nobody cares about it. The thing is that people want to see Indiana in the championship game, even though they would acknowledge I think down to the last person, that Ohio State's a better football team than Indiana. And that's really what it comes down to. Ohio State is a better team. They proved it on the field. And now Indiana is not as good without Michael Penix, and Ohio State seems to have gotten better as a result of that game and some of the issues that came to light in that game. So it's pretty disingenuous for anybody, any writers, any SEC coaches, to sit there and whine about Ohio State being in the Big Ten championship game, because the whole point is to find the best teams. Those teams have been determined definitively on the field, and now they will face each other.
And I think it'll bear watching to see how the College Football Playoff Committee has Ohio State, where they have Ohio State seated on Tuesday night. I personally believe that they will still be in the top four. I won't be surprised if they're fourth, simply because of the fact that they haven't played as many games. But by that same token, I do believe this coming weekend after the Big Ten Championship, Ohio State will be one of the top four teams in the college football playoff.
Yeah, I would expect so. And if they go out and take care of business against Northwestern, they will be in line for an invitation to the college football playoff, and let the chips fall where they may. But some of those chips are the following: there was no Maryland game, there was no Illinois game, there was no Michigan game, and I think that's going to hurt Ohio State going into the playoff, if assuming they get by Northwestern and do what they need to do, and nothing insane happens with the rest of the college football world, which there's never a guarantee of that. This is I think other people have said this, and I think it's true. This is a team that's about where Ohio State would be in maybe the end of September, or maybe mid-October, not quite to November. That's where this team is in terms of playing time and reps and correcting mistakes and all of that. And perhaps they would have picked up a few more knocks, some injuries along the way between now and then. But this team, I think, it didn't do Ohio State any favors. Nobody did Ohio State any favors by canceling games. This is not a team that wanted those days off, that wanted those extra bye weeks. This is a team that needed reps and needed time to form some cohesion. And if they make the playoff, they're going to be playing teams that have played 10, 11 games. And that's a big difference. And it's a big advantage for the teams that have played 10, 11 games.
I completely agree. And just to kind of reiterate the point, Ohio State did not want those cancellations. Like you said, they did not go seeking, we want additional bye weeks. By all reckoning, the three games that you mentioned, two of the three were canceled on Ohio State. One of the games was canceled by Ohio State when they went to Illinois. Now,
correct.
That being said, I certainly agree with the sentiment that Ohio State, if they could have played any other Big Ten opponent, and or if the Big Ten had allowed for non-conference opponents, because I know that was kind of making the social media rounds. Oh, Ohio U is available. People were suggesting playing against Cincinnati before Cincinnati had an outbreak of COVID on their own. Texas A&M, all these different schools. Ohio State wasn't looking to get out of playing a game. I completely agree with you. I think Ohio State is certainly probably, if not the end of October, I'd say definitely in that October-ish kind of percolation of their skills and overall development, and they are not going to be nearly as well seasoned as the teams that are higher ranked within the college football playoff. So it remains to be seen what kind of an impact that will have on Ohio State. But I just simply believe that when the college football playoff committee does their seeding and ranking, that Ohio State will be one of those top four teams based on maybe not the volume of evidence, but what Ohio State has produced on the field during 2020.
Indeed. And then, of course, that is always dependent on winning against Northwestern, whether or not they get into the college football playoff. So let's turn our attention, Chip, toward some of what transpired this weekend when Ohio State and Michigan were off unexpectedly, and the Buckeyes end the regular season 5-0. The Wolverines end the season 2-4. We will, this was a big rivalry weekend. It wasn't the only game canceled, though. Purdue and Indiana, we mentioned Indiana and Purdue both having some issues, both pausing activities, and that game also got canceled. So, will Indiana be able to play championship weekend? We don't know. So even if Indiana had been granted that, that the stay of execution by that 6-game minimum rule, arbitrary rule that the Big Ten came up with, if that had not been rescinded, that it's entirely possible they would have had to just forfeit to Northwestern.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate all across the country. You and I, as well as any of our listeners, we're seeing that COVID outbreaks are, I mean, they're just rampant. I mean, they're wildly prevalent. I mean, no matter what state you live in. So it remains to be seen if Indiana and Purdue, they're scheduled for championship weekend now, rescheduled. It remains to be seen if that if that's going to take place.
All right, let us go through the rest of the lineup of games from this past weekend, Chip, so we can sort of set the stage, if you will, where everything is. Rutgers and Maryland played into overtime, Chip, and the Rutgers Scarlet Knights came away with a 27-24 victory. There was no Talia Tungavailoa in this game, but Rutgers still gets the victory and moves to 3-5. Maryland 2-3. And it was a big day for Jake Funk on the ground for Maryland, 180 yards, but not enough. He had to actually come out of that game in the fourth quarter, and Rutgers prevailed. So congratulations to Greg Schiano. His team rallied in that game and ended up pulling it out in overtime. And that was one of 2 overtime games this year for the Scarlet Knights. They missed a field goal, or they would be sitting at 4-4. And that's a little bit better than Tennessee finished this year, in case you're keeping tabs on the school that listened to Clay Travis rile up its fan base and not hire Greg Schiano, something that seemed like it was already a done deal. Greg Schiano with a 3-5 Rutgers team, and I don't know how many years you got to go back, Chip, to find 3 Rutgers victories in the Big Ten. But it's more than 1 year.
I can certainly believe that. And Greg Schiano has certainly justified the faith that the Rutgers Scarlet Knights had in him by bringing him back. Now, granted, the results on the field are not nearly as impressive as I'm sure Greg Schiano or Rutgers would like them to be, but that program is completely different program from where it was a year ago at this time. So that's a credit to Greg Schiano and his coaching staff for coming in late in the recruiting process. And even with that, being able to and we've acknowledged with a lot of taking advantage of the transfer portal, getting that program to be far more competitive than you or I or any Ohio State fan had seen in the previous seasons.
And just a really belligerent team, hard to play against. They don't give up. There's no quit. They fight to the end. Very, very Greg Schiano-esque team, and so congrats to him and the Scarlet Knights for an improved team, and maybe a sign of things to come in Piscataway. The land grant game took place in Happy Valley, and it looked like Michigan State was going to run Penn State out of the building. It was 21-10 at the half. Spartans led, and then I think Mel Tucker let just like some nephews and some cousins come in and play the second half because they got killed in the second half, and Penn State wins at 39-24. Penn State improves to 3-5. Michigan State falls to 2-5. But for a while there, it looked like Mel Tucker was going to get his team to 3 wins this year, and that's something that we didn't expect.
It isn't, and I think Mel Tucker, I just mentioned how Greg Schiano came in late. Nobody came in later than Mel Tucker. I mean, he was hired after the fact. I mean, the recruiting class was already signed, sealed, and delivered to Mark D'Antonio, and then, oh, surprise, Mark D'Antonio's out, Mel Tucker's in. I think Mel Tucker is certainly going to have that program in a competitive nature, certainly, if not next year, very soon. And I think getting back to the whole land grant trophy that you referenced, I thought one of the best sound bites, without question, of the weekend was how James Franklin alluded to how that trophy kind of looked like spare parts that were found in your father's garage that were just kind of I guess you could say, melded together. The kind of like the idea of this trophy in and of itself. So I think, kind of poking fun at the Big Ten for this manufactured rivalry that they're so desperate to try and, oh yeah, like this long simmering rivalry. Well, nobody believes that. I mean, even though Penn State's been in the Big Ten since, like the early 1990s, nobody believes that this is this long simmering rivalry between Penn State and Michigan State. So that trophy, I think, I mean, I credit to James Franklin for kind of, making fun of that trophy, for the absurdity that it is.
So that's right up there with wasn't there a chair that a couple teams competed for a couple years ago and it got broken?
That sounds right.
And Minnesota and Nebraska, that might have been that game. Minnesota and Nebraska played. The Golden Gophers go to Lincoln and come away with a 24-17 win. They get to 500. Nebraska falls to 2-5. Oh, one more thing I did want to say about Michigan State. They have found a quarterback, though, going into next year. Peyton Thorne with another big day, 22 of 39, 325 yards and 3 touchdowns. So, what he did against Ohio State, he was able to build on. But they just couldn't get anything done in the second half of that game. But we move on. Iowa and Wisconsin played, and I don't know what happened to Wisconsin. It's like they peaked in game 1, and then they were just terrible. And they end up 2-3 on the season, losing 28-7 in Iowa City. And this was a big game for Tyler Goodson, 11 carries, 106 yards. They made Spencer Petras look like a competent quarterback, which much of the year he has not looked like. But Iowa's defense is legit.
Completely agree. I think Iowa, something you said earlier in the podcast that, Iowa lost to Northwestern. I would certainly be on the mindset that if Iowa were to play Northwestern now, I certainly think Iowa would be favored. I think that that defense, as you said, is certainly very formidable. And getting back to Wisconsin, that's a pretty accurate assessment. That, I mean, they hit their stride in game 1 and have kind of steadily declined ever since. Graham Mertz, I'm not sure if it's a lack of confidence or what the issue is, but offensively they are sputtering, and it might be the kind of thing where, maybe after this weekend that Wisconsin, they can kind of get back to fundamentals before they wind up in whatever bowl game that they're going to be selected for.
Do you get to go to a bowl game at 2-3? I guess you do this year.
Just depends on, I guess, on the powers that be. I mean, there are a number of programs. I know that Boston College, Virginia, I believe Pitt, other programs have said, something, thanks, but no thanks. We're not going to go to a bowl game. So I think Wisconsin would certainly want to go to a bowl game, but it wouldn't be shocking if they decided to say, something, it's been kind of a long season and we're just going to kind of hang it up and regroup for 2021.
Right. Jim Leonard's defense has kind of fallen off. The wheels have kind of fallen off for him a little bit. He was not able to get his guys going the last several games, and granted they were on the field a lot because the offense was sputtering. But Emir Smith Marset from Iowa, 7 catches, 140 yards, 2 touchdowns. They didn't even bother covering him a lot of time, and that's not a good thing. It's not a good policy to not cover the other team's best receiver, I think.
That's a good policy. I don't know. Like I said, Wisconsin, like you said, it seemed like in game 1 they were firing on all cylinders and they looked so unbeatable. And then ever since then, it's just been downhill, especially on offense. But like you said, the defense is starting to have their issues as well.
And then rounding out the Big Ten this week, Chip, Illinois and Northwestern playing for a fake hat that resembles the one that Abraham Lincoln is depicted wearing in many photos and sculptures throughout history. Illinois and Northwestern went about as you'd expect it to. The Wildcats win that 28-10, and I tried not to watch much of this game, even though Northwestern is next, because this will tell you a little something about the game, Chip. The top performers of this game, when you look at passing, listed on the ESPN score page, Isaiah Williams of Illinois was the top passing performer. He was 4 of 8 for 86 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, sometimes the results speak for themselves, don't they? It's that game. Say what you will, like you said, Illinois Northwestern. I still believe that trophy is still better than the land grant trophy given out, and it was unfortunate that this game was the end of the tenure of Lovie Smith. It led to the end of the tenure of Lovie Smith. Northwestern
Right.
is never going to be confused with an offensive juggernaut, but they were able to run all over Illinois. So, it was kind of what, like you said, what you would expect from a Illinois Northwestern game.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it's a season that they relieved Lovie Smith of his coaching duties after this loss, and Chip, it's a couple weeks to Christmas. It's kind of a jerk move.
Well, I think it's more than a complete jerk move, not only for the timing of Christmas. I'm thinking, and maybe it's just because as we're recording this, the early signing period is in a few days, and we're going to talk about recruiting in greater detail next week. But my thinking is, I can't imagine, if you are a player who had verbally committed to Illinois, what's the incentive to sticking with that verbal commitment when you have no idea who the coaching staff is? They've been relieved of their duties, only days before that early signing period. So, this is going to have a dramatic impact on Illinois' recruiting class for next year. And then it also sets back the recruiting efforts for, like the year or two after. So, like you said, the timing is just really very, very puzzling.
Yeah, not good, and sorry, Lovey. It's not easy to be out of work this time of year, but Lovey made good money, so I'm sure he'll be fine. He's not going to worry about putting food on the table for a little bit. But yeah, you're right. And speaking of commitments and people leaving, another piece of news came out this week is that Michigan center Zach Carpenter has entered the transfer portal. So he is a guy who had started the last couple of games for the Wolverines, and he has seen enough of Jim Harbaugh and his program.
It's going to be very interesting because the contract extension has supposedly been offered, and rumor has it for less money than what Jim Harbaugh was making. And with, I guess you could say it's one of these things where there's a lot of, I guess you could say, gamesmanship on both sides from the administration to Jim and Jim Harbaugh. So the fact that Zach Carpenter decided to enter the transfer portal is telling. And again, I think it just speaks volumes about these players who have verbally committed to the Wolverines, that just that level of uncertainty about, okay, is Jim Harbaugh going to be my coach or not? I can't imagine what that must be like. So this has dramatic impact on the long-term recruiting classes, not just for 2021, but also, 2022 and beyond.
Yeah, it's a little strange that this hasn't gotten done. If it was going to get done, this being the extension that has been rumored for Harbaugh because of this. You got the early signing period, early signing day coming up, and without any certainty at all, I think the biggest beneficiary of this has got to be Mel Tucker over at Michigan State. He came in, like you said, extremely late last year after the stuff that happened with Mark D'Antonio, and then he I guess mutually agreeing to part ways, or however they announced that last year. And if you got guys that have Michigan and Michigan State offers and they don't know who's going to be their coach at Michigan, that could be some late flips for the Spartans, and that could really help get Mel Tucker his career there kind of jump-started and get that program turned around more quickly. And I think we've seen that Mel Tucker can coach. So it would not be surprising if the Wolverines move here backfires a little bit. This is a situation where you kind of see where the administration's coming from. You're kind of hoping, maybe they're hoping that Jim will just leave. And, I think that's something that you've been speculating for quite some time, that maybe an NFL job will come open and he'll leave, and it'll, sort of alleviate the burden of having to part with this, Michigan man who's been there and done good things as a player. And then, he was supposed to come in and be the savior, and he wasn't. And then now they don't have to admit that they were wrong in hiring him by then firing him, if he just leaves on his own. But if it doesn't happen, now they're going, well, it's a post-COVID world, Jim. We don't want to pay you quite as much as we were paying you before. And, your on-the-field results kind of don't bear, a raise, certainly. So this is a program right now that's having some issues.
Supposedly, Jim Harbaugh has reassured his players that he's recruited that he is going to be here for them. And obviously, as an Ohio State fan who has relished all of the victories that the Buckeyes have had against that team up north since Jim Harbaugh has taken over, I certainly want Jim Harbaugh to stay, but it just seems very, very odd that, considering you're going into such a pivotal part of the football calendar with regards to that early signing period, that they did not announce the extension. So it's just, like I said, I think it's supposed to be, possibly announced by the weekend. So we'll have, a greater understanding as to whether or not Jim Harbaugh is going to be on the sidelines for the Wolverines in 2021 and beyond.
I say give him a lifetime contract. That's just me.
Oh, it's not just you. I think a sizable portion of Columbus, Ohio, and Ohio State fans all around the world.
Yep, you can do it. You can do it, Michigan. Just make him coach for life. He stays as long as he wants. And I think everybody will be extremely happy with that decision outside of Ann Arbor. And it's good for the lulls, as they say online.
Yep.
All right. So that takes us through our trip around the Big Ten matchups, and we've got plenty more though to talk about. We've got some potential Illinois coaching candidates. We can talk about, of course, the Northwestern game. Let's get to that in just a moment, right after this. All right, Chip. Let's get back to Illinois for a minute and talk about the coaching candidates there. There's some names that have been thrown around that I think are kind of unrealistic. I definitely don't expect Luke Fickell to leave Cincinnati for Illinois. Right now, he's in a great situation with the Bearcats. He is in a place where he can win and do well in his conference and get people talking about the Power Five and how maybe the Power Five should start to get into the playoff and that kind of thing. And he could just keep that going seemingly for as long as he wants to until the right job comes along. But this is a guy in Luke Fickell that, if he's turning down Michigan State, why would he turn around and go to Champaign, Illinois?
No, you're precisely right. Luke Fickell, if let's take the fact that he turned down Michigan State, as you and I and everyone else knows, that's what happened last winter. And I completely agree with you that if he turned down Michigan State, where it would be easier to win, why would he accept Illinois? And I personally, I do not believe he has an interest in that job. My speculation is Luke Fickell is going to stay at Cincinnati until what he considers the right job to open up. Now, the right job, I think the dream job is obviously to come back to Ohio State. That being said, I think there are other jobs that Luke Fickell would certainly be tempted by. I think Notre Dame would be one. I think Penn State would be another. I think at his core, I think Luke Fickell is he definitely is a Midwestern guy. And I think that's why there are certain jobs that he knows that he can be at Cincinnati. From what I understand, the recruiting class that he's bringing in is well regarded. I mean, he recruits Ohio extremely well. Now, getting back to Illinois, I think Josh Whitman, who is the athletic director at Illinois, has to make the call to Luke Fickell.
Sure.
But he has to be prepared for thanks, but no thanks. And that's, I don't think Luke Fickell is going to go far in the discussions with Josh Whitman. I'm purely speculating here that I think he truly, as you and I agree, I think he knows he has a really good situation in Cincinnati. So I don't think the discussions will go nearly as far as they went with Michigan State last winter.
Yes, one guy who does not appear to be headed to Illinois is Tom Herman, who it looks like will be back with Texas in the shocking aftermath. Just tremendously shocking aftermath of Urban Meyer not becoming the Longhorns head coach. If you've got a Buckeye Scoop subscription, if you're one of our insiders, you have known for quite some time that Urban Meyer was not going to go to Texas, and certainly that came to pass, much to, for some reason, the surprise of some Texas fans. I don't know why they were surprised by it. I was surprised that even became a thing at any point. And I was one of those that said, maybe Urban comes back if he's feeling healthier and he's got some kind of new treatment for the cyst, and he can control that and manage that better than he did with Ohio State. Maybe Notre Dame, but I just didn't see it anywhere else, and I didn't see it at Texas for sure. I don't know if Texas has become one of those programs that can't get over the hump. They seem to have everything that you would need for a successful program, including a conference that's not actually that difficult to win. All you got to do is get to Oklahoma's level. And if you're Texas, you're not really that far below it right now. So it's not that difficult. But for some reason, it just seems like no one can get that program going. And so it's just one of those things, and now we know Tom Herman won't be at Illinois, but who will be at Illinois? That's a great question, and I don't really have a good answer here. I know that on the Buckeye Weekly they spoke about Marcus Freeman, who's of course an assistant under Fickell at Cincinnati, but I think the play there for Marcus Freeman is to either, like they mentioned on that show, was to either ride Fickell's coattails to the next big gig or try to become the next head coach at Cincinnati when Fickell does leave.
I think Marcus Freeman warrants a phone call, and this is meant with no disrespect to Marcus Freeman. I mean, he was a tremendous player for Ohio State. He's doing a very good job as Cincinnati's defensive coordinator. I think he's going to warrant a head coaching position of his own in the future. But if I'm Illinois, the names that I'm going to go after are going to be coaches who are established within the Midwest, who have had certain degrees of success. Now, some of the names I'm going to throw out aren't necessarily household names, but again, that's kind of where Illinois is at, in terms of when you look at that program in terms of its overall stature. And I'm going to probably mispronounce this gentleman's name. It's not intentional, I can assure you, but the head coach of Buffalo, Lance Leipold, Leipold, he's been the head coach at Buffalo for a number of years prior to going to Buffalo. Here's something that it's almost Trussell-esque in terms of his background. He's originally from Wisconsin, so he kind of checks that box off in terms of like knowing the area. He was the head coach at Wisconsin Whitewater, which is a Division III school. He won 6 national championships at that level. And the reason why I say it's kind of Trussell-esque, it's, if you recall, that was one of the knocks on Trussell. Oh, at coming from Youngstown State to Ohio State, can he make that jump? Mm-hmm. And I think Buffalo, they're competing for the MAC championship. To me, like that would be a legitimate candidate right there. Some other names I think personally, like Sean Lewis, who is the head coach at Kent State, very young, I think in his early 30s. He's only been at Kent State for a couple years, but Kent State is traditionally one of the worst programs in the MAC. He has Kent State playing very competitively, especially on offense. Another MAC guy, Tim Lester, who is the head coach at Western Michigan. And here's a bigger name at a bigger program, Jay Norvell, who's the head coach in Nevada. They all have that Midwestern background. From what I have been able to read, that part of what led to the demise of Lovie Smith at Illinois was an inability to recruit some of the talent from Illinois to Illinois. I mean, it must be, we talk about it on this podcast about how disheartening it is for Rutgers to lose a lot of in-state talent, to Penn State, to Ohio State, it's having that. It's got to be the same thing when you're talking about you're in Champaign, you're a couple hours from Chicago, you're close to St. Louis, and you're not able to keep some of that local talent from going out of state or going to other MAC programs. I think a guy like any of those names that I mentioned would be ideal candidates that wouldn't necessarily break the bank either. So no disrespect to Marcus Freeman. It's entirely possible that he might get a call, but I think if I was Josh Whitman, who's the athletic director at Illinois, I'm thinking I want an established head coach who's ready to make that leap from the MAC up to the Big Ten, and any of those coaches I think would be very viable candidates in Illinois.
Yeah, and one of the things that a lot of people are saying is that Illinois needs to find its version of Tom Allen, somebody who really wants to be there and build that particular program up. And I think there's some validity to that, rather than somebody who's going to try to use Illinois as a stepping stone. The thing I don't think Marcus Freeman should go there, because you don't want to be another Darrell Hazel where you get a shot at a Power 5 program, and then if things don't go well, you get fired, and then it's then you have to sort of start building up again. And so here's a name that I kind of am throwing out there. I don't know if there's interest, on either party's part, but Indiana defensive coordinator Kane Womack.
I like it. I thought, I may be mistaken, but I thought that he was actually a candidate for the South Alabama job. Maybe I misread that on social media, but I certainly could see that. And here's an intriguing name for you that I don't know if he wants to make the move, but the head coach at Army, Jeff Monken, is, I think, an Illinois native. Just imagine running the triple option. But I'm just saying,
that'd be something.
It would be. You're talking about a guy who, again, has that Midwestern background. I think that's what's so essential to being successful at Illinois.
Right. You are right about Kane Womack. The thing that I'm thinking, though, because this just happened, it's like, I know it would be maybe seen as a jerk move, but if Illinois calls, do you want to be at South Alabama or at a Big Ten school? You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Well, what about What about Nick Sheridan, who's the offensive coordinator at Indiana? You know what I mean? Like he's a young guy. He's done a good job with Indiana. So I think, the opportunity is there if they hire the right guy who can recruit and develop talent from the state of Illinois and make that program far more competitive than they have been in recent years. One of the things I want to, an interesting point, this is going to just show my age, and I'm sure this name is going to bring back memories for you, is that I think you raised a very good point about the concerns that I think any college football fan has about their program being used as a stepping stone. I read something online before we started recording the podcast. An Illinois fan said, you realize the last coach that was able to do that, to leave Illinois of their own volition by using it as a stepping stone, was John Makovic back in 1992 when he left Illinois for Texas. So
right.
I think the concerns about being a stepping stone, you can relax. I think it's going to be a while before Illinois, gets to, being, considered, ripe for the plundering of bigger name programs.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, though. You go to a place like Illinois, and if you can do well for 2 or 3 years and you get those offers and leave, then you have used it as a stepping stone. What you don't want is that. What you want, if you're Illinois, is somebody who's going to be in for the long haul, who wants to be at Illinois, who is going to commit to bringing Illinois back to the John Malkovich level and just trying to maintain that. And it's not easy. It's not easy in the Big Ten West anywhere. We've seen. I mean, look at Northwestern last year and Northwestern this year. Things just seem to kind of go up and down in that division. I mean, even Wisconsin is up and down, and they're one of the most reliable winning programs over the last 10 years in college football. Even that school is capable of falling and slipping up, and certainly Kirk Ferentz, who's been at Iowa forever, is the same way. They'll have a bad year or a mediocre year, and then they'll have a good year. It's really hard to maintain anything in that division, but Tom Allen is a guy who is committed to Indiana and making Indiana great and staying at Indiana and just, I want to be the guy at Indiana. And it's easy to say that until maybe some offers come along, but that's what Illinois really needs. I like your Lance Leipold suggestion, but there's not a guarantee that he would not also say, hey, okay, I got Illinois going the right direction, and now UCLA calls, or whoever. That's the risk that you have and the risk you run, and there's no guarantee. I mean, you really have to build a program into something. Clemson didn't used to be a great job, but where would you put that job now?
Oh, I think valid points all throughout. I would make the point that when it comes to the Big Ten West, and you're right. I mean, when you think about, the ups and downs that all the programs that you rattled off there, Northwestern, Wisconsin, Iowa, et cetera, very valid points. I would make the argument that Illinois, out of just about every program in the Big Ten West, in my opinion, actually has the natural advantage of Chicago and St. Louis that, for example, this is not meant disrespectfully about Northwestern. Everyone knows that Northwestern, that their academic standards are going to automatically eliminate a lot of top talent anyway, that it's going to be difficult for them to be able to recruit a lot of top talent into their program. When we talk about, some of the other schools like Nebraska, I mean, geographically, they are really limited as well. So I think the right candidate, you're right. I mean, they might use it as a stepping stone, but I think any of those MAC candidates that are MAC coaching candidates that I rattled off, especially the ones who are from, like a Sean Lewis, who is from Illinois, I think anyone who's from the Midwest would probably be more inclined to stay rather than use it as a stepping stone. But that's just my opinion.
Well, you might be right. From a selfish perspective, I would like the job to go to Bert Bielema.
Supposedly he might be one of the candidates.
Yeah,
I guess he's kind of intrigued.
He's a guy that you gotta consider. He's been out. He's had some success in the Big Ten. He's not been able to parlay that anywhere else, but he knows the area. He knows the Midwest. He kind of has the Midwest mindset, and the Iowa job is not opening up anytime soon, it would appear. So why not?
Oh, and he would definitely make it interesting, to say the least, in terms of firing off salvos. That's for sure.
Bert back in the big. That's what this conference needs. All right. So we've talked about the Illinois situation. We've talked a little bit about the games that happened. We've, of course, talked about the game not happening. We've still got to get to our Northwestern preview. Do we want to get into the whole Dabo Swinney and Dan Mullen nonsense that has been taking place over the last several days?
I personally do not, but I'll let you get on your soapbox if you want to vent.
Well, I mean, the long and short of it is just that they have whined about, the lack of games that certain teams have played this year and whether or not they're deserving of a spot in the, Final Four, the college football playoff. And, that's whether or not you think that's a valid point. I've already spoken about the fact that it's getting to the college football playoff would certainly be something Ohio State wants, but it would be a difficult road for Ohio State, having not played as many games, just in terms of getting reps and getting your team ready to play at that level. I mean, have you seen Alabama's offense? And their defense is starting to come around. So I think there's something there, but I don't think it's the place of a team that could be knocked out, like Florida seems to be right now, and like Clemson could be if it loses again to Notre Dame. It's just posturing, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of the lobbying that Urban Meyer did when he was at Florida, when there was talk about maybe Michigan and Ohio State, a rematch might be a good national championship game. And Urban was like, no, we deserve a chance to be there. No, they've already played each other and blah, blah, blah. And that's sort of, in my mind, was the first time I can recall a coach lobbying in the national media for, their team to get in. And of course, this was before the college football playoff. And now it seems like it's a rite of passage. Like everybody seems to be doing it, and it pretty much just happens in the South, it looks like.
Well, until the college football playoff is expanded and adjusted to automatically include the winners of the major conferences, that's what you're going to have. And it's unfortunate, but I think when you have conferences like the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, et cetera, all these where you don't have automatic berths, that's what's going to happen. So I think it's rather unfortunate, but yeah, like you said, it certainly seems much more inclined to happen within the South. I don't know why that is, but I certainly, as I said at the beginning, I certainly believe Ohio State is going to be recognized by the college football playoff as one of the top 4 teams when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much more into it because Tony Gerdeman already said all there is to say on this topic with his column this week. It's very funny. Go and read it at BuckeyeScoop.com, where he talks about how playing games, even if you lose them, is more important than wins. So go check that out, and it says it just beautifully. It sizes everything up just nicely. All right, Chip. Big Ten championship game. Ohio State, Northwestern Wildcats. This is going to turn into a rock fight. This is going to be a difficult game. It always is with Northwestern. It just seems to always be a slog. And Northwestern has a good defense. They have a passable offense, a decent offense. But more than anything, they just play really smart and really hard. And that enables the team to stay in it, and they have a belief in themselves. And that's something that's maybe as important as anything else in college football.
I like that term slog because that's what they want to turn the game into. I mean, Ohio State certainly has a bunch of, thoroughbreds at wide receiver. They want to overwhelm you with their speed and their size, and Northwestern is content to, okay, let's slog this game. Let's slow it down. Let's play at a pace that's to our liking. Let's make you earn every yard on the field and make it difficult for points to come by if they can do so. So I think if there's an advantage Ohio State has going into this, the fact that it's going to be indoors, the fact that they don't have to worry about the weather. And if they can build a sizable lead, Northwestern, granted, they've had a very good season, especially in comparison to last year, that Northwestern, their offense is not necessarily designed to throw the ball all over the field. They are more of a, run the ball, which kind of, again, lends itself into Ohio State's defensive strengths. Stopping the opposing run is something that Ohio State has done very well this year. So Ohio State has some natural advantages that you can certainly hope that they will take advantage of when the Big Ten Championship kicks off on Fox at 12 p.m. on Saturday.
Yeah, it's difficult to get a read on Northwestern, really, because of the way their schedule sort of unfolded. There's a lot of really bad teams on their schedule. They caught Iowa early in the year before Iowa got going. But you look at the national leaders in scoring defense, and I don't know if this says more about the scoring defenses in the Big Ten West or the scoring offenses in the Big Ten West, because you look at number 2, and there's Northwestern. Number 6 is Wisconsin. Number 7 is Iowa. So you've got 3 of the national leaders in scoring defense, all from that division. Do you think that the Big Ten West is the best defensive division in college football, Chip?
No, I do not. I just, I think that they have. They're sound defensively. I think Northwestern and Iowa especially, I think they're very, very sound, but I do not necessarily think that there's anyone that makes you kind of quake in fear on, when you look at Northwestern defensively and think, oh my gosh, like, how are we going to block so-and-so? I mean, there's nobody on the Wildcats now. They're well coached. I know that Mike Hankwitz announced prior to us recording this will be his final season as the defensive coordinator for Northwestern. So there's some emotional motivation right there for the Wildcats. Mm-hmm. But that only takes you so far. I mean, I think, getting back to, when you talk about defensively, they are a good reflection of their head coach, who played, tough, hard-nosed football when he was a linebacker for Northwestern, 20 plus years ago. I think, by and large, Pat Fitzgerald, this team, they're strong fundamentally, but they're not going to be there's not going to be a lot of flash. There's not going to be a lot of sizzle. They're just going to be tough, hard-nosed football, and they're just going to play as tough as they can for as long as they can, which should be the whole 60 minutes.
Yeah, one thing they do well is they funnel everything to their linebackers, and their linebackers make a lot of tackles. They're led by 78th year senior Patty Fisher, who's been there since, I think, the Louisiana Purchase, maybe. He's been around a while.
I was going to say the Roosevelt administration, and when I say that, we're not talking FDR, we're talking Teddy.
Yeah, he is. He's been around a while. I mean, people used to kind of joke about Aaron Kraft being at Ohio State forever on the basketball team, and it just seems like Patty Fisher has been around a lot longer than that. He is averaging 9 tackles a game, along with fellow senior linebacker Blake Gallagher, and then Chris Bergen, another linebacker, right behind them at 8.29 tackles per game. They are the leading tacklers on the team, and there's a reason for that. Again, they do a good job of occupying linemen and letting their linebackers make plays in the run game, but also those guys do well and drop back and make a lot of tackles in the short passing game as well. So Ohio State's going to, you go back a couple of years when Ohio State played Northwestern in the Big Ten Championship game, and that's kind of what you're going to be looking for. They're going to be trying to hit them on the edges, get the ball downfield quickly. I think we've seen this year that the things that Garrett Wilson does are things that Ohio State's going to want to do in this game, and certainly set up some of the things that Chris Olave does. And that's what I expect to see when the Ohio State offense and Northwestern defense are on the field. Is that kind of in line with what you're thinking, Chip?
Certainly. I think, like you said, I think Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, as I said, the strength of Ohio State's offense is in the passing game. It's not to shortchange the Ohio State running game. But let's face it, I think by emphasizing the Ohio State running game, now you're playing into the strength of that Northwestern defense, as you just so accurately described, like those linebackers, allowing them to put you in, I don't want to say impossible yardage situations, but now it's like those, now your possessions are more difficult to manage. Whereas like if you can control the game with the passing game, and let's face it, I mean, we've seen, other defenses struggle this season trying to contain Olave and Wilson, and we haven't even talked about, I know we often, say like, is this the game? Is this the year? But like the tight ends, like, like the idea of the matchups with the tight ends, I think that's an underrated aspect of this game going into it, that maybe the tight ends are that secret weapon that are waiting to be unleashed upon the Wildcats because they can't cover everybody.
Yeah, I would not be surprised to see Ohio State try to spread Northwestern out and run out of that formation, because then you force Northwestern to cover the width of the field, and that's going to certainly open some gaps in behind those defensive linemen. So we're going to get a good look at whether or not the Ohio State running game was a one-game wonder with Trey Sermon against Michigan State or not. And I don't anticipate Justin Fields running the ball a lot, but he's going to have to show it to open some things up in the last game that the Buckeyes played. So Northwestern second in scoring defense in the country, and of course they're very highly rated in all of the defensive categories because I mean the fact is they're playing in a division that lends itself to not giving up a lot of points and stuff. So the Wildcats are 13th in total defense, not too shabby. They're right behind Iowa, and Wisconsin is number 1 in that category as well. So again, I don't think that Wisconsin and Iowa and Northwestern have great defenses. I think they have good defenses and play in a bad offensive division.
That's fair. I think, like you said, I think offensively there isn't anyone, when I think about the Big Ten West, probably and this is going to sound terrible, probably the best offense of the Big Ten West that I've seen, just because, like the big plays has been probably Nebraska. Maybe you have a different opinion, but and we'll talk about, common opponents that Ohio State and Northwestern have had. And they are, when you talk about Nebraska and Michigan State, we have, some good comparison there. But yeah, I think, again, I think Northwestern, they pride themselves on being a very fundamentally sound defensive team, and they are the beneficiaries of playing in a division where offense is not necessarily explosive.
Yeah, both rush defense and pass defense 21st in the country, just to conclude my the thoughts there on the defense for Northwestern. Now, offensively, I'm not really sure what Northwestern does really well. I know that they have a decent running game, but honestly, they don't score tons of points. So I think they just take advantage of turnovers, and they're very stubborn. They're able to put some drives together. It's a hard team. Most teams, if you try to make them go 11 plays, they get impatient at some point. Northwestern doesn't do that. They stay patient, and they are willing to go on an 11 play drive.
Well, let's face it. I mean, when you think about, like Peyton Ramsey is at quarterback, graduate transfer from Indiana. He, even when he was at Indiana, was never going to be this guy who, was going to quote unquote take the game over. He was always a game manager type. And now he's at Northwestern, where again, that mindset, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like I think you're onto something when you say, taking advantage of, the turnovers that the defense has created, operating on a short field. Let's move the ball very efficiently with the running game. Let's try to limit mistakes. that's kind of offensively, that's the kind of team, like that's the kind of game that Peyton Ramsey, when he would play for Indiana, what he's done this year for Northwestern.
Yeah, Northwestern is 89th in scoring offense in the country, and they're averaging 25.3 points per game. I think they're going to need more points than that to win this game, and I don't see them doing that unless Ohio State turns the ball over a few times.
You're on that. I completely agree with you. I think, when they're averaging that, that 20, I think you said 25 points a game, again, it's just kind of, all right, let's get some points on the board. Let's control the game with the running game, burn the clock. They're not looking to be explosive offensively, and Ohio State certainly does not want to be turning the ball over and making this game any closer than it needs to be.
Northwestern averages, Chip, 351 yards per game. That is 100th in college football. That is a nice even 100th. Ohio State is 6th in total offense, and they put up 532 yards per game.
Well, when you say, I apologize for cutting you off. When you say that they, in terms of their yardage per game average, that they are 100th in the nation, I think you and I, we give each other a lot of grief about our woeful preseason predictions for 2020. But if memory serves, the reason why you and I both, I can speak for myself, the reason why I know I felt very comfortable predicting Northwestern to have a difficult year is because they were just atrocious offensively last year. So for the fact that they are 100th in the country, that is an improvement compared to where they were last year. That speaks volumes about what offensively what they have done.
If you want some comparisons, Rutgers averages 10 fewer yards per game than Northwestern. They are 104th. Michigan State averages 330 yards a game, so about 21, 2 fewer first downs per game, essentially, for the Spartans. They are 109th in the country. And if you go back and you look and see what Rutgers and Michigan State did against Ohio State's defense, that's probably what you can expect from Northwestern.
Exactly. I mean, there are some common opponents that both Ohio State and Northwestern had. The fact that Ohio State and Northwestern both played Nebraska. Ohio State and Northwestern both played Michigan State. Both Ohio State and Northwestern beat Nebraska. Obviously, Ohio State beat Michigan State. Northwestern did not. So, and I think your comparisons to, Rutgers, the fact, when you talk about Michigan State, that should give Ohio State fans, I don't want to say, I don't want anyone to ever be overconfident, but it should give a degree of comfort going into the Big Ten championship about what Northwestern, what this is going to look like offensively.
Now, the outlier here is that Indiana is ranked 98th in total offense, and they gain only 7 more yards per game than Northwestern, and they were able to put up a lot of yards on Ohio State and a lot of points on Ohio State, but they have much, much better skill position guys, a Whop Fillier and a Ty Freifogel and those kind of guys than Northwestern has. So I'm not as concerned about Northwestern hitting some big plays. I definitely would like to see Marcus Williamson not bite on double moves so hard. But when I think of Northwestern's offense, I think they're going to use their tight ends. They're going to try to run the ball. They're going to try to get 4 or 5 yards per play if they can, and they'll take a 2 here and there. They'll take a 1, but they don't want to get behind the chains. If this team can stay on schedule, then they have an opportunity to, like I said, make those 10, 11 play drives where they keep the ball, grind the clock down, and keep your offense off the field and frustrate you a little bit because they're not really making any big plays. They're just making a lot of little. It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah, and if I have a concern about Ohio State going into this game is because I know that this was something that Urban Meyer, when he was the head coach, he confessed that it was certainly something that I don't want to say necessarily was discussed with the team, but the idea of trying to look impressive to the college football playoff committee by, what they did against Wisconsin, knowing that they had to make a statement. I'm hoping that Ryan Day does not allow that mode of thinking to come into play here. Because I just think, win the game. I think that the points, the yards, they're going to come rather than, where I think some of those mistakes that Justin Fields had against Indiana were as a result of pressing. And I would hate to see him do that against, again, a well-coached defense in Northwestern and make this game closer than it needs to be.
Yeah, and I think that if they just go out and play the way they have the last couple of times that they were off, I think that'll take care of itself. This is a team, I think, Ohio State, with a lot of things to prove. If you've got the offensive linemen back, they're going to need to prove that they can do as good a job in a run game as their substitutes did last time out. They're going to have to do with that. And also, I think this team plays better when it's got a chip on its shoulder, and I think not getting to play Michigan is going to be a chip on their shoulder. I don't anticipate complacency unless they get up big at halftime, and then complacency could set in. We've seen that several times this year.
It has, and that's where, again, I can only hope that Ryan Day and the coaches have really drilled into them that we can't afford any complacency in the second half, especially against a team like this that's going to fight you tooth and nail all the way to the final seconds.
But I do think if Ohio State takes like a 35-10 lead into the half, then I think that it's going to be tough for Northwestern to win that game because they don't have a quick strike offense. It's going to take, like I said, it's going to take death by 1,000 paper cuts on offense to get there. I mean, they are in the passing game 106th in the country. They average 180 yards per game, which I would have expected a little bit better with Peyton Ramsey. I mean, he's a capable quarterback. But again, we talked about the weapons, and the weapons difference between Indiana and Northwestern, and certainly between Ohio State and Northwestern, there's a little bit of gap there.
And I think Northwestern, I think they have a capable offensive line and good running backs. I think just playing to their strengths, they're content to win, like you said, just very effectively by controlling the clock by using that running game.
And they'll do things like, they'll do some misdirection, they'll do some trapping, they'll use Ohio State's aggressiveness against them. So it's important for Ohio State to be sound fundamentally and play within themselves. And if they do that, then they can put up a lopsided score. It's when they try to press and do fancy things and get caught doing them, that's when, kind of trouble finds them.
And again, let's hope that they don't press, because that's the when you're trying to get that coveted playoff spot, you don't want to be making sloppy mistakes. I don't want to say in front of a national television audience. I mean, let's face it, at noon, I don't know if it's going to be the game to watch per se. I know it's going to be on Fox, but if they're considering it's not necessarily in prime time like the Big Ten championship game normally is, how many people besides, Ohio State, Northwestern fans, Big Ten fans are going to be watching it? Obviously the playoff committee. So just play your game, and I think everything will fall into place.
So yeah, I think that too. That I think is more of an advantage for Northwestern than it is for Ohio State to have that game at noon, because Ohio State is, I think, a little more used to being under the spotlight and being on national TV and being, in one of these big glitzy, glamorous night games than Northwestern. But just an average Saturday at noon in Indianapolis, that I think that fits Northwestern's style. By the way, the Wildcats, just to put the finishing touch on their offense, rushing offense is not bad. 60th in the country, which, it's not great, but it's 170 yards rushing per game. That's right behind Wisconsin at 171 and Iowa at 171 also. So those three teams right together. So again, we talk about great defenses in the West. Well, you're looking at some mediocre rushing games.
Yeah, and I mean, like, they put up, I know, over 400 against Illinois this past weekend, but that's Illinois. I think Ohio State, they've kind of made a habit of clamping down on the opposition running game. So let's see how they do on Saturday.
All right, so let's when you're looking at this team, you got Drake Anderson, a running back who is their leading rusher, and it's 4 yards a carry. That's fine. It's good. 2 touchdowns. 256 yards, though. Isaiah Bowser, 229 yards, 1 touchdown. Evan Hull was the one that had the big game this past weekend. He's a freshman, and he's come on, and he's a guy who's going to be tough. And I think, too, you got to watch Peyton Ramsey taking off with the ball, especially when Ohio State is in man coverage. So that's where really Northwestern wants to make its money. Then you look at the passing game, and we've talked about Peyton Ramsey, who is completing 59% of his passes. 9 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. So doesn't make a ton of mistakes, but also not a ton of big plays, Chip.
No, it's definitely going to come down to being sound fundamentally for the Ohio State defense. I think, like you said, that committee approach that Northwestern has, shutting down the running game and limiting Peyton Ramsey on design quarterback runs to try and, keep Northwestern behind the sticks when it comes to, getting them off the field, like a lot, some 3 and outs. And then if Ohio State can capitalize on that, put points on the board, put Northwestern at a further disadvantage because offensively they're just not built to, in terms of like any kind of like the track pace that Ohio State traditionally would like to play.
Mm-hmm. Chip, would you like to take a shot at educating me on how to say Northwestern's leading receiver's name?
I couldn't begin to tell you because it's certainly it's a work in progress, put it that way, in terms of like trying to. I'm sure that it's going to be something that will be mispronounced in the days leading up to it, and I have no doubt during the actual game itself.
So we'll just call him RCB. 344 yards receiving, 4 touchdowns, and this is the guy they go to in the red zone. I'm going to try it, Chip. So catch me if I fall. Get the net ready. Ramad Chiacchio Bowman. Is that anywhere close, you think?
I think it's very close.
It's a hyphenated name, and he's the guy that I think that Ohio State's going to have to deal with in the red zone, especially. They've got a tight end named John Rain, who's putting together a pretty decent year, and they've got another one, Charlie Mangieri. Those 2 guys combined have 3 touchdowns, and between the 2 of them, about just under 200 yards. So again, they don't put up tons of yardage numbers, but they just use their passing game to augment their running game. They're fine with punting the ball and playing defense. It's very Trestle-Ballian.
Very good description, and I think that's kind of when we start talking about final score predictions. That's kind of, you can get an idea as to kind of where I'm leaning on that one.
All right, so there's your tale of the tape. Before we get to our key, our picks to click and our predictions, our score predictions. Do you want to just quickly go through championship weekend?
Yeah, we can fly
the
through
matchups. It. All right, so it's going to start, Chip, on Friday at 4:00 with Nebraska and Rutgers, and then after that, Purdue and Indiana. So that's, I don't know. Purdue and Indiana seems somewhat intriguing, maybe just because it's a rivalry game. Nebraska and Rutgers does nothing for me. But, they said they were going to go, the 1s were going to play, the 2s, the 3s, the 4s. They went away from that because Indiana is the second-ranked team in the East, and Purdue is the 3 from the bottom in the West. So that's not really a like-for-like like Indiana-Iowa would be.
I know. I was hoping for Indiana-Iowa. I had even posted something like that on social media. It's a disappointment that game didn't come to pass. However, I certainly understand that the Big Ten, recognizing the fact that Purdue-Indiana is a traditional rivalry game, that they were trying to replicate that to try and make up for the fact that game didn't get played last weekend. So, yeah, that might be worth watching on Friday night.
Yeah, so in normal circumstances, well, not normal because this would have been the first year for it, it would have been Iowa, Indiana, and then Rutgers and Purdue, I believe, or it could have been Penn State and Purdue. But then you go to Saturday, and of course the big nude kickoff, Ohio State, Northwestern, and it's it's one of those cases, Chip, where you're going to have your dessert before you have your meal and your vegetables and stuff.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that every now and then.
Another rivalry game after that, Minnesota at Wisconsin. Chip, these teams aren't even in opposite divisions.
Again, I think they're just trying to make up for lost games that were casualties of the COVID issue that has plagued the Big Ten this entire season.
I guess they don't want to see Minnesota against Maryland and Wisconsin against Penn State. That's the only thing I can think of. Michigan's going to go and play Iowa at 7 o'clock, and I don't hold out a lot of hope for the Wolverines in this game.
And from what I was reading on social media, I don't think the Wolverine fans have a lot of hope. They are afraid of being bludgeoned on national television and having Iowa, the players waving gleefully to the children in the hospital nearby, watching it all take place.
And then, of course, the consequence of having Minnesota, Wisconsin play is you've got Michigan State and Maryland. Feel the excitement, Chip. Feel it.
Well, let's just say that, for a 7:30 on Saturday night, I'm going to be interested to see what kind of ratings this gets, considering they're going up against the SEC championship on a different channel.
Are you interested in the SEC championship, Chip? Are you going to be watching that, or are you going to be watching Maryland and Michigan State?
I'll flip back and forth. I'm a junkie on that in that regard, but I think I think the SEC championship is going to turn into a blowout. I don't know necessarily that Michigan State, Maryland will.
What game are you looking forward to other than the championship game of this group?
I will say that I think out of I kind of mentioned like the Friday night game, the Purdue Indiana game Friday night. I want to see what on Saturday night what the Wolverines do at Iowa, even though I'm convinced Iowa's going to win easily. I just want to see, because based on what we talked about earlier in the podcast, is the Jim Harbaugh contract resolved? How does the team come out after 2 weeks off? Who's at quarterback? A lot of things to kind of see against an Iowa team that certainly seems to be playing very confidently going into the bowl season.
Yeah, Illinois and Penn State makes no sense to me. It should be Illinois, Michigan State if they were sticking to the guns that they were originally going to have here. But that is a game I don't even think Penn State wants to see. I mean, Penn State is going to play an interim coach-led Illinois team. Is this just a way to get Penn State to 4-5, where it's a little more respectable?
You said it. I'm not disagreeing with you.
All right. Well, I guess we'll see what we see this weekend. It's college football, and who knows how many of these games might not even happen. We talked about Purdue and Indiana, and that could be canceled again. Who knows?
I hope not, because that is, like I said, it's a traditional rivalry. But I mean, I haven't seen anything yet. But as you said earlier in the podcast, things were trending positively for Ohio State, Michigan, and then everything fell apart. And who's to say, before Friday night if things don't necessarily turn out negatively again.
All right, Chip, it is that time. Score predictions and picks to click. Let's start with our picks to click. I'm going to let you go first on the defensive side of the football.
I'm going with Pete Werner. I think Pete Werner, this is a game that is going to be designed for him to make an impact on that Northwestern running game as well as on the short passing game that Northwestern has.
All right, I am going to go, as I often do, and go along with the same concept, but a different player, a guy who was out last game and who has been practicing. I think Tuff Borland will be back, and I think he's going to play with a little chip on his shoulder. And this is the kind of game he could do well in because Northwestern likes to run the football, and he is pretty good at stuffing the run. So I'm going to go with Tuff Borland. Think he'll put up some numbers in this game.
Makes sense.
I will stay with me for the offensive side of the ball, and I mentioned this earlier, so I'm going to stick with it. This, I think, is one of those games where Ohio State's going to want to get the ball out on the perimeter and sort of down the field on the outside and maybe on some slants as well. So I'm going to go with Garrett Wilson because I think the things that Ohio State does well with Garrett Wilson are the things that would work against Northwestern's defense.
I like it. As a matter of fact, that was going to be my selection, so I commend you for your astute choice.
What do you got?
Scrambling to make up for that, I'm gonna just go with Justin Fields, not necessarily because of the passing, but I think because of the added element of running. I agree with you said earlier, like I don't necessarily think Justin Fields is going to run the ball a lot, but I think on passing downs when something is not open, that he will be able to make something happen with his legs. So that's how I think he's going to have obviously a big game passing, but I think we're going to see it more on, second and short, third and short, and him being able to convert those into first downs and keep drives going. So Justin Fields is my pick.
Well, I feel like that's a pretty safe pick. I feel like that at some point we stopped picking him because he just always clicks. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. No, I stole your guy, so I will allow it. And I hope you're right. I hope Justin Fields clicks. Because if he doesn't, that's not going to bode well. Chip, your score prediction for Saturday at noon, Northwestern Wildcats, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Usually, again, a rock fight. But, is this one of those ones where Ohio State's going to go out and just clobber them like they have done so many times in the past, like after Jim Tressel lost to Northwestern and then how he just basically punished them the rest of his career at Ohio State? Is it going to be one of those types of games, or is it going to be a rock fight like in the 2018 Big Ten championship game? What are your thoughts? Where do you see this going?
I think Ohio State is going to be able to put points up on the board in the first half, and then in the second half, just kind of salt the game away with that running game. I think offensively, it's just too much for Northwestern to keep pace. So I'm going to go Ohio State 56, Northwestern 21.
Wow. You're going high scoring and no holds barred, and there's going to be no doubt in the playoff committee's minds that this is the team that needs to be in that either third or fourth slot, the Ohio State Buckeyes. I'm kind of leaning toward rock fight, but I think the rock fight will happen in the second half, and I'm going to go 34-24 Ohio State. It's just, I think that this Northwestern team has a lot of pride. I think they have a lot of, I think they're going to have a lot of emotion, like you talked about earlier with the coach being his last year, and of course not Pat Fitzgerald. That would be an insane amount of emotion if Pat Fitzgerald was announcing this was his last game. So I think Ohio State will take a somewhat comfortable lead into the half, but then Northwestern will chip that away in the second half. That's kind of how I see this going, which would mirror a lot of what's happened to the Buckeyes this season. But I think this is a much better team than some of those teams that were able to accomplish that earlier in the year.
You might be on to something.
All right, well, we will see which one of us is closer to the truth. I think most of the year, one of us has been closer to the truth for Ohio State, and the other one has been closer to the truth on the opponent. So we'll see how it shakes out on Saturday, but that's the good thing. We can come back next week and talk about it and check in on our picks to click. And, by then we'll know, is Ohio State going to make it to the college football playoff? I mean, where is the college football playoff going to happen? I mean, there's been talk about
moving the Rose Bowl and all kinds of stuff. So it's been a weird year in 2020. I don't think that's a shocking statement to anybody at this point. I don't think it's going to get any less weird in the next week or two. So I guess the thing is for us to come back and check it out and talk about it next week.
Looking forward to it.
All right, Chip. We don't have any mail this week, but if you want to ask us a question, you can certainly do that on Twitter. Chip is at Chip Minnich, Minich. I am at Mike36Fan. Just drop us a line on Twitter and ask us whatever, and we'll answer it on the air here on the Silver Bullets podcast. Chip, where else can people find you on the internet?
They can find me as a contributor to Athlon Sports, writing about college football. I'm not going to be writing about the Ohio State Northwestern Big Ten Championship this week, but as Michael said, you can find me on Twitter at Chip Minnich. Feel free to hit me up with comments, questions, critique, anything you may possibly want. Give us ideas about what you want us to talk about here on the podcast, or anything about Buckeye Scoop that you might have an interest in.
All right, you can find me on BuckeyeScoop.com. I am the grumpy old Buckeye, and I typically will write up all the things that aggravated me during the game, item by item, and sometimes a little tongue-in-cheek, a little fun, and other times actually seriously aggravating. So check me out at BuckeyeScoop.com. In fact, check everything out at BuckeyeScoop.com. Become a subscriber. You will not regret it. Tons and tons of information behind the scenes in our Ask the Insiders section. You will get your answers before anyone else gets their answers on the hard-hitting questions, especially in the recruiting game. I mean, I don't think there's a site out there that can match what Buckeye Scoop is putting out there to its insiders in the recruiting game. Chip,
I agree, and considering we will have the early signing period, the signees, we'll have that information available to talk on our next podcast. But as Michael said, there's not a better site in terms of if you're wondering about a certain prospect that you're thinking, okay, is he going to be a Buckeye or not? The staff at Buckeye Scoop, they're going to be able to tell you yes or no, probably better than any other staff that follows recruiting in college football.
Absolutely. And tons of great shows like this one over at the Buckeye Scoop as well. The Buckeye Scoop Radio Network is full of outstanding programming. The podcasts are numerous. In addition to us, we get the Morning Scoop, which is practically every morning with Tom Orr. You've got the Buckeye Weekly with Tony Gerdeman and Tom Orr, and there's Banks in the Give. There's or Gives in the Bank. I always get that confused. There's the Scoop World Order, and there's the Buckeye Sloopcast. I mean, Chip, this is just an embarrassment of podcast riches.
Yeah, but like I said, something for everybody. Depending on what your interest is, we've got you covered.
Right, we have one called Anything But Football, which delves into other Ohio State sports. So, yeah, check them all out and subscribe to them all. And if you are one of those people that likes to be helpful, one of the things you can do for us is to go to iTunes and look us up, the Silver Bullets podcast, and leave us a star rating and review. We would appreciate it. Costs you nothing and helps us to climb those search charts and be seen by more people. So we would appreciate that. Chip, anything else you want to contribute here before we get out of here?
No, just enjoy the game on Saturday afternoon. Enjoy championship weekend, and look forward to talking Ohio State football with you next week.
Yeah, it'll be great. I cannot wait to break down the Nebraska-Rutgers game with you also next week.
I was going to say that's more fun than mere mortals should be allowed to experience.
All right, there's nothing left for us to do, Chip, but do what we always do at the end and say, Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!